I'm Dallas Jenkins. I am my Uncle David's oldest nephew, and I am the product of Jerry and Diana, who she just mentioned. And Dave would want me to make sure I also introduced myself as a city boy. I was reminded of that often. Throughout most of my life, the vanOrmans have been one of my favorite families in the world. My cousin Seidel was one of my closest friends, remains one of my closest friends. And every year of my upbringing, without exception, there were two highlights of the year. One was our summer family reunion, usually in Brown County, Indiana, and one was Christmas, where we would get together again as a Whiteford family. Never missed it. It happened every year. And seeing my Uncle David was by far one of the top highlights of each of those visits. And at the age of 12, a yearly tradition began for me for a couple years, where I would come for 3 weeks and stay at the vanOrman home so I could detassel corn. And believe it or not, even though my hands are still relatively smooth, I was actually pretty good at it. Don't be fooled. And while I was there, 12, 13, 14 years old, probably violating some child labor laws, but working long hours, my Uncle David poked and prodded and even sometimes mocked me into being a farm boy. And to this day, I tell everybody, lots of people, I make movies for a living. I worked in and out of Hollywood, and I make movies for a living, but I'm very proud that I learned how to work on a farm. And my Uncle David was largely responsible for that. As I thought over the last few days, what stood out most about my Uncle David? Obviously, we all think of his humor, and I'll get to that in a minute. But about his personality and his relationship with God, a verse came to mind that said, "Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart." David was very much like Christ in that way. He looked past the outward appearance. He looked past the surface, and he looked at the heart, always. He's known as the funny guy, but he always went deeper. It made him an innovative farmer. He never was content to just see what was presented and accept that. He always wanted to move forward. He always wanted to improve things. He always wanted to know things better. He was always at the forefront of technology. And that same mindset applied to his relationships. He saw you more than most people. It does not surprise me whatsoever that Pastor Stephen ended up being the pastor here as a result of Uncle David, because he got to know him, and he knew that he would be excellent because he took the time. He wanted to know you, and who among us does not want to be known? And Uncle David knew me, and he knew the people in his life. He was never content with small talk. He always asked questions, always asking deeper questions. He was curious about you, and he took delight in your successes. I oftentimes would hear him point out to someone or to myself, "You're the kind of person who would do this," or "You're the kind of person who I bet loves this." And then he would also point out things, "I bet you would be good at this." And when you were successful in something, he would rejoice in it and give a laugh or affirm what he probably already knew. And of course, no matter who you were, stranger or friend or family member, he always wanted to know where you were in your relationship to God. Nothing mattered to him more. That was always the number one question that mattered to him most when he would talk to people. And it didn't matter what level they were at. He wanted to know if you were growing. So, of course, I have a couple of quick stories before I close, both of which become somewhat family lore. The first one is, as all of you know, David was one of the grandest storytellers of all time. And I don't necessarily mean true stories. So my father is an author, has written over 190 books, and is very well known in the Christian community. And so in our hometown, there was a Christian bookstore. So we lived here at this time in Zion, Illinois, and there's Zion Christian Bookstore. My Uncle David walked in with me. I was in high school, And he went up to the manager of the Christian bookstore in our hometown and said, "Are Jerry Jenkins' books worth more now that he's passed away?" And the manager in our hometown of a Christian bookstore where Jerry Jenkins was very well known, her eyes widened and she said, "He's passed? He's passed away?" And my Uncle David said, and I quote, this is not an exaggeration, this is word for word, "He was skiing in the mountains of Colorado and he was gored by an elk." And he did not laugh like you are laughing. He was dead serious, which is why, as it says even in the program, that most of us couldn't even tell when he was joking or not. Now, of course, the story didn't end there because this was in our hometown. So by the time we got home, my mom was on the phone talking the prayer chain from our church off the ledge. The word had spread that quickly. And of course, she knew while she was on the phone, when she heard the news that her husband had been gored by an elk, that Uncle David was in town. So another story that's very personal to me was when I was detasseling during the summer. Oftentimes, my Uncle David would give us a ride, myself and Seidel and Jenny. And one time we were in the back of the pickup truck, and we're driving past some cornfields and whatnot. It was about 5 o'clock at the end of the day. And I was tapping on the hood of the cab. And he pulled over and stopped and said, "Do not touch the top of the cab again. It's very distracting. Don't do that anymore." And I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Was that you, Dallas?" I said, "Yes, I'm sorry. I won't do it again." About 10 minutes later, he pulled over again. And he leaned out and he said, "I told you not to touch the hood of the cab again." And I said, "I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did. I'm not stupid. We're not leaving until you acknowledge and apologize for touching the top of the cab." Well, if you know me at all, I am just as stubborn as he is. And I said, "Well, we're going to sit here for a long time because I didn't do it, and I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do." So we sat there for a long time, and I would have sat there through the entire harvest of that summer, but I wasn't going to admit it. And so finally, believe it or not, after about probably 45 minutes, he reluctantly pulled off the side of the road and went home. And to this day, every time we see each other and every time the family's together, we still debate it. I still insist that I did not touch the roof of the cab. He still insists that I did. Now, I'm not here to confess that I touched the roof of the cab, because I didn't. But I will confess that when I heard of his passing, my first thought was sadness, and I thought of my cousins who I love so dearly, and I thought of my Aunt Sarah who I love so dearly, and I thought of how much we're going to miss him. But I do confess that my second thought was, I'm so glad he finally now knows the truth. I'll close with this. There's a song, one of my favorite songs from Jars of Clay called "Fly." And some of the lyrics are as follows. It says, "I saw a host of silent angels lining up in their row, knowing that all the promises of faith come alive when you see home." And it says, "Shed your heart and your breath and your pain and fly. Now you're alive." My Uncle David's pain has been shed. And now I know that he's truly alive. And we also know that my Uncle David's home is not his house. It was not the fields. It was not the shed. It was not Albania. Now he's truly home. And he's no doubt going around asking people a bunch of questions while he looks for something to do. But I love my Uncle David so dearly. I love you, Aunt Sarah. I love you guys so dearly. And we weep with you, but we also rejoice with you. Amen. Amen.